Greetings and welcome to another 1615 webinar. I am Matthew Ellison. I serve as president of 1615, and I also work for the organization as a church missions coach. I want to thank all of you for being online today. And I want to let you know what a great blessing it is to serve the body of Christ in this way. It is our pleasure to provide missions mobilization resources all the time, but especially so in this unprecedented time. We hope that the things that we're sharing are an encouragement and a blessing to church missions leaders everywhere. So before we begin today's webinar, some upcoming events and resources that I believe you'll want to participate in. So beginning in April, we formed a partnership with Missio Nexus. Actually, we've partnered with them for some time, but we decided to come together and do a peer-to-peer gathering where church missions leaders from all over the place gather online, and we share content and ideas and issues pertaining to COVID, and then we break up in peer-to-peer groups. It's been an incredibly rich time. You can watch the previous two gatherings. They are archived. You can get those at 1615.org. Our first one was a survey of church missions leaders, and the last one was with Ed Stetzer. Very insightful information was shared. And we have another one coming up. It'll happen on the first Wednesday in June at 11 a.m. Mountain, 12 p.m. Central. It will be with Jeff Jackson, who did a webinar for us recently, and this is going to be specifically about caring for missionaries in the midst of COVID. Now, I'm pretty biased. I've known Jeff for over 20 years, but I think he's got a better handle on missionary care than anyone I know. He's passionate about it. He's been a church planner himself in Southeast Asia, and he's been a pastor for decades, and he just brings both of those things together in an incredible way, showing churches how to care for missionaries, and he has some great ideas on what that looks like in the midst of the COVID crisis. You can register at 1615.org, and I encourage you to participate in the live event because this gives you the opportunity to interact with other church missions leaders. And then let me let you know about a resource that will be available this fall. Last year, we launched the Mobilized Church Workshop, a 2-day regional workshop, and God blessed it in incredible ways. And the focus is about mobilizing churches to realize their potential to reach the nations. How do you unlock that God-given potential? And we focused in on Acts chapter 13, looking at the church in Antioch of Syria, which is actually the first church we read about in Scripture that had global vision and strategy. Again, it was a powerful time. And really, this is a accumulation of our last 15 years of missions coaching. We've gathered data, wisdom, and learning from other churches, and we're sharing it in this context. Well, COVID came along, as you know, and so we're uncertain if our regional events will take place this fall. So we are converting the Mobilized Church Workshop into a virtual experience. It will happen over 8 weeks. It'll be a weekly 90-minute gathering where you'll meet with the missions coach and other churches, and it will be an environment that the coach fosters of learning and discovery. And then between those gatherings, churches will interact virtually over content, video content, to pray and think about how to mobilize your church to reach the nations. A great resource in the midst of this COVID situation or otherwise. But there'll be information on our website in about 4 weeks. We're piloting it right now, and we hope to make it widely available this fall. So we hope you'll be a part of the Mobilized Church virtual experience with us. And then I want to draw your attention to the mission table. This is a resource we launched a few years ago. We gather leading missions thinkers and practitioners around a table, and we tackle some of the most critical, controversial topics impacting missions today. There's 3 seasons of episodes that are on there right now. It's on pause, any new episodes, because of recording issues. However, there's some great content up there. And so if you're a church or missions leader and you're looking for some stimulating, thought-provoking content, please visit missiontable.org and take advantage of that excellent resource. We also recently launched a podcast with Missio Nexus. We call it The Mission Matters. It's a double entendre if you didn't notice. And the idea is the mission matters, it's important. So this is a place where we talk about the importance of the Great Commission, but it's also a place where we talk about the matters of the mission. And you can listen to that on any place you get your podcast. 2 episodes are already out, and we'll be rolling out 2 a month. Really excited about this great resource. So in the midst of social distancing and all those things, we hope you'll take advantage of these resources. So Today's topic is about fanning the missions flame in the midst of a pandemic. And I'm sure you agree that keeping missions vision out there in front of your people in the best of circumstances is quite difficult, even more so in the midst of a crisis. So today we're going to talk about how to fan that missions flame and keep people's eyes lifted to the nations. Our presenters are David Johannes. He's the founder and president of Within Reach Global. You can follow him on social media. You see all those links right there. And this slide will be up again at the end in case you didn't have time to write it down right now. And our other presenter is John Hurst. He's Director of Program Innovation for SIL, co-founder of Generous Mind. And again, you can read his articles on the church's response to coronavirus pandemic at that link. Once again, it will be available at the end of the presentation as well. And you can follow him on those links right there. And if you don't get them this moment, you can stay on till the end and also write those down. So I want to remind everyone this is being recorded and it will be available for viewing at 1615.org in about a week. We have 117 people registered for today's webinar. I want to mention that John and David presented the first installment of God, Germs, and Global Missions a little over a month ago, and it was so well received and it was so beneficial that we decided we needed to do round two. So gentlemen, I thank you so much for being with us today. John, if you want to turn on your video link, that'd be great so people can see you. And I'm going to give it over to you at this point.
Thank you, Matthew. It's great to be with you all again. I'm excited about this session because it really builds on the last one. And I would encourage you, if you haven't gotten to listen to the last one and you're listening live, to go back and listen to that later. And if you're listening to this as a recording, I would actually encourage you just to stop right now and make sure you listen to the first one first so that you can get the full benefit of our two topics. But today we're moving from what we did last time, which was a focus on insights around the strategy for global mission during a pandemic within the local church. And now we're moving to the very practical topic of specific ways you can foster and flame and fan that flame of innovation and of missions in your church, given the situation that we're in. And one of the things that makes this challenging, because we are now in May, and different states and different parts of the world are all in different levels of opening up. So when we talk about simply doing virtual church, that may not be everybody's experience, right? So one of the challenges that we have today is that we're all at a little bit of different places in our re-entry. Some are in full lockdown, some are now meeting together, some are working on the plans to meet together. And so we recognize that as we build this webinar and try to build out some really practical tools that can work for you wherever you are in that process, knowing that that new normal is going to be a new reality. I'd like to just share something really quick with you before we jump into our first point. And that is this phrase that you probably have heard. Some people attribute it to Winston Churchill, where he said, "Don't let a good crisis go to waste." How many of you have heard that phrase? Well, I'd like to challenge that phrase this morning. I think that phrase, in my mind, is a moment of being an opportunist, right? It's taking advantage of a bad situation and trying to make good out of it. But what I would like to challenge you with today, and I shared about it in the last session as well, is that fundamentally what we're learning about this pandemic and about crisis like this is that fundamentally what they tend to do is accelerate things that are already in place, that are already happening, rather than fundamentally change behavior. And when people are in the middle of a hard, difficult situation, changing behavior at the core level is very challenging. While some behaviors do change out of necessity, it tends to be an acceleration of things that were already happening. For instance, a great example is many people were already using Zoom, etc. And now it's just 5, 10, 100 times more people are doing virtual meetings. And so it's an example of an acceleration. So when we think about that in light of global mission, what I want to call you back to is, what is the foundation that you were already building before this crisis? What are the things you were already putting into place? And I want to encourage you that as you think about these different practical tools that we're about to share with you, think about how you're going to build off that foundation and continue that acceleration, rather than thinking about brand new things to introduce. And I think that that way, you have the ability to honor what you've done and hopefully see it grow and develop into something even more mature. Now, if you feel like, wow, we didn't really have a foundation, well, then this crisis is your chance to really study and go, what should that foundation be? And so I'd like to encourage you to think, the way I would describe it is that God doesn't want us to be pragmatic. He wants us to be practical. So instead of using something to try to get people to do something that they may not have done before because it's a crisis, say, how can we practically use what God has already been doing, but now accelerate it, advance it, develop, and grow it? And so that really is kind of where I want to start with this first section, the first way, and that it revolves around suffering. How can you deepen suffering as a category that your congregation understands? And the reason I say deepen is because it's already there, right? People already have a sense for what it means to suffer, right? Whether it be cancer in their lives, a lost job, the challenges with their children. They understand that there are trials in life. But in America, especially, and in the global north, we have so many things that are in general going so well um, for many of us that suffering isn't a category so much as it is a circumstance. And I think what we're seeing in this moment where we are the same yet different around the world, everyone's in lockdown, is that we are getting a better sense for the suffering that actually is been more commonly experienced in many parts of the world already. And this is actually a moment for your missions program to insert something into the content of the Sunday morning service, into the program of the church that you are uniquely qualified to insert. And that is the wisdom of the global body of Christ around what does suffering look like. You know, I think about Tim Keller's quote when he says, suffering is actually at the heart of the Christian story. It's at the heart of the story. So as we are now all different but the same, we have some commonalities we can now join together with our brothers and sisters around the world in ways we could never do that before. So what I'd like to encourage you to do is an idea that I've come up with, and it's to take the three core themes of suffering that we're seeing in this pandemic and build them into your church program. And those are, first of all, loneliness. Who has not experienced loneliness through this pandemic? At various levels, but it's all been there. The second is hunger or lack. You know, obviously in the United States, we have not necessarily, all of us, experienced hunger. There are people that are going hungry, and we need to recognize that and figure out how our church is responding to that. But around the world, as David is going to share with you a little bit later, the level of hunger, the level of lack of food and access to that because of what people are going through is dramatic. And so we're experiencing that at some level together. And then finally, of course, sickness, right? The fear of sickness, the actual experiencing of it, the loss of people we love. So what I'd like to encourage you to think about is, how do you take these three topics and build it into how you're discipling the people within your church? One of the thoughts I had is, could you design 3 Sundays where you tackle a theme each Sunday and address that suffering at a local level, at a regional level, at a national level, at a global level, and invite your missions partners into that and say, how could you speak to our church about this topic, what you're seeing in your community, whether it be a local partner, whether it be a missionary, whether it be a ministry that you partner with. I think there's a huge potential for missions to speak into and deepen the church's understanding of suffering as part of our discipleship, part of our growth. Now, going on to the next one is really deepening of the role of prayer in your missions program. And I love this picture of Christ the Redeemer statue in in Brazil, you know, and on it are broadcast all the flags of the world, right? This sense of being together, of a understanding of people all over the world is just a powerful image that represents the fact that prayer is a key part of what we're doing. And prayer is critical to us understanding and wrestling with the suffering and the struggle that we're having. Corey Ten Boom asked this question. She said, is prayer your steering wheel or your spare tire? Now, I know that in your churches, there are people who are passionate about prayer for the nations. You've been investing in them, they've been investing in you. You've been working on this foundation at some level, whether it's one person or 100 people. And the question is, how do you give that person the stage and help them to make prayer for the nations a deep part of your church's experience? A crisis tends to reveal what we value, right? And a lot of times in our churches, we have this high value for doing things. We want to get things done. And so we say, I just prayed, or yeah, we prayed, now let's get to the real work, right? And so one of the things that we need to do in very practical ways is say, how can prayer not be a nice add-on to our missions work, but how can it be a core function of what we do in missions in our church? And I would like to share with you a few ways that I think are potential ideas for you to consider. The first is something called the UK blessing. And if you go ahead and go 2 slides ahead, Matthew, you'll see the YouTube screen. And the UK Blessing is an amazing song that was put together by worship leaders from all over the United Kingdom. And they sang this blessing from Numbers. And it is a powerful blessing for their nation and for the nations. And it has received millions of views, and hundreds of thousands have been moved by it. And as I've studied this blessing, and looked at how they constructed the song and how they laid it out and how they did it, I think it becomes a powerful tool for participatory prayer. And I've actually set up a blog. Actually, if you go to the link that Matthew showed a little earlier, and it'll be up on the page at the end for my coronavirus resources, I actually have a blog kind of giving you instructions on how to use this as a participatory prayer tool. But what I love about it is, first, the blessing is given to the receiver, to me, to you, the first person listening. And you can bask in that and realize that God does want to bless you. He does want to care for you. And that's the beginning of being able to minister outward, right? If you don't believe that about yourself, how are you going to tell that to anyone else? And so the song begins that way, where it kind of comes over you in waves of, yes, God wants to bless me. He cares about me. Then the song allows you to begin to imagine in your minds the members of your family and sing this blessing over them, and then your neighbors, and then your community, and then your state, and then your country. And then just imagine going from continent to continent, the people that you know in each one of those places of the ministries that you know, praying that same blessing. It's a really, really powerful way to help elevate the members of your congregation from their own fears and insecurities and worries and wonders, and help move them to a state of praying for the nations. So I'd like to really encourage you that way. The next one is what I call a weekly prayer challenge. You have a unique opportunity to install praying for the nations as a part of every week's service. I think what can be done now, because of all the wonderful tools online, we're going to talk about some of those in a minute, to essentially pick one of your countries, one of your missionaries, one of the ministries you work with every week, and in your virtual service, or as you go back to physical services, maybe a hybrid, installing that as a category where you say, we're going to stop and pray every week for one of these places, and we're going to send you an email with tips on how to pray throughout the week. And the amazing thing is, there are some amazing resources being created around COVID-19 that will allow you to make an entry point for that into your congregation if praying for the nations hasn't been part of what you've done. The first one is Operation World. So I've got a blog post on my coronavirus page that you'll be getting a link to, and I've got 10 ideas for how to incorporate global mission into your virtual service. And I link to Operation World's special COVID-19 page, where they have all these prayer requests about how you can be praying for COVID-19 related issues around the world from Operation World's partners. I would encourage you to grab some of those and use those as a way to say, hey, here's what we're praying for in our community around this issue. Here's what's going on right now in Guayaquil, Ecuador, or in Brazil, or in Ghana, or in the Philippines. And not only that, Operation World has come out with a brand new ebook called Global Transmission, Global Mission. It's a free download. I also have a link to it in that blog post, where that really goes through all the trends around the world and allows you to build out content and help you to instruct or help or guide people in prayer for the nations around this issue. The other resource I want to highlight is called Prayercast. If you go to the next slide, prayercast.com is an amazing assortment of videos where you can pray for almost every nation of the world with a prayer video. It's a wonderful thing if you're doing virtual service to be able to click on it, to be able to share it with your Zoom group, and everyone sees the same video, and you can have them in their homes praying together for Iran or Iraq or Ukraine or Russia or Bangladesh or Brazil. But they also have special videos just for COVID-19 that are very powerful. And one of the things they do, if you look at the bottom, they've actually got a new feature called Praying the News that's powered with Mission Network News. And so they actually have ability to see the news stories that are in the headlines and then ability to pray through that together as a congregation. It's a powerful, powerful tool. The final thing before we move on to the next topic that I want to talk to you about is a new idea that I've just been working on that's called essentially allowing your missionaries to essentially model intercessory prayer for you. So what I'd like you to consider is, what if you were to bring together 2 or 3 key missionaries and ask them to join you in a Zoom room and record it and have them pray for a certain topic, a certain country, a topic, a need, and have local partners, missionaries, ministry partners join together and model what it looks like to do intercessory prayer, really deep prayer. And then share that with your congregation. Have them be there to view it live or share it as a podcast or share it as a video or an audio. And then after you've had your missions partners model that, let's say once a month for several months, then have the youth group do one. Then have a certain Bible study do one, or your missions committee do one, and begin to model what intercessory prayer looks like for your congregation and integrate it with missions so that prayer and missions are synonymous in your church. I think it's a powerful opportunity for that. And speaking of missionaries as a resource, that's really the next topic I want to talk about. Go back to the one before there, Matthew. Missionaries really can be an amazing resource for you in the lockdown. And I think one of the things about missionaries is they are really, really good at assessing a local situation, adapting quickly, and coming up with solutions, because their world is changing all the time. A missionary day in and day out is having to do this. Well, in my mind, I would think that they might be the first ones you should call as you ask yourself, how are we going to adapt to this situation? Because they have had to do it as a lifestyle. And you're now having to adapt very radically and dramatically. And now they become a huge resource for you. So number one, I would suggest interview your missionaries, talk to them, say, what's working? What are you trying? And you're going to hear more from David in just a minute. Creative things that they're trying that you could then actually apply in your local communities, and your missionaries could be a source of strategy for you. Second is a resource tour. I'd encourage you to ask all your missionaries, what are they reading? What tools are they using? What things are they integrating around, or what they're interacting about? And then collect those and share those with your body. Say, here's what our missionaries are reading. Here are the articles. Here are the videos. Here are the webinars. And finally, are there ways that you could actually say, hey, missionary, hey, ministry, hey, partner, what does your virtual church look like right now? Could our church actually join in and watch 5 minutes of your church, or vice versa? And is there a way that we can learn from each other on how we are doing church in a new day and a new age across the continents? The next one I'd like to talk about for a minute is short-term missions. We all have opinions about short-term missions. Some of us have done it really well. Some of us really, really struggle to do short-term missions. But I think in this moment, we have a unique opportunity. And that is that you have a latent asset that is all the effort, all the time, all the money, all the prayer that you were going to spend on missions, short-term missions this summer, this year. Now, if some of it gets to happen, that's wonderful, right? But what I'd like to encourage you to do is 3 things. Number one, I want you to do an assessment. I want you to count all the hours your people were going to spend. Every prayer warrior, every coordinator, every attendee, everyone. Count all the hours. Then I want you to add up all the money you were going to spend. And then I want you to assess the impact you were hoping and praying that God would allow you to have. Write that up in 2 or 3 pages. Okay? That represents the value of what you were going to do this year in relationship to that. Now, get your stakeholders together. Present this to them. Say, listen, this is what we were going to invest as a congregation. And before you reallocate that money, and I know it's hard because many churches are getting hit with reduced funding, and you're struggling to figure this out. But before you give up that money that was going to be invested that way, say, how would God want us to reinvest what we were going to spend in short-term missions this summer? And then finally, I'd like to encourage you to then, if you had a team all ready to go and maybe they had to cancel, don't fully give up. Look at virtual activities. I was talking to someone on Twitter just yesterday, and what they did was they did a virtual afternoon tea with their partner in London. They had 40 people show up on a Zoom call to have tea, to do a virtual prayer walk with the partner, to hear what the partner was doing, and to pray together. And I think there's a huge amount of power in some of these virtual short-term missions kind of events that are really worth doing. And I'd like to give a shout out to a group called the Upstream Collective. If you go to upstreamcollective.org, by next week, the president of that organization is going to have a real good resource out to help you think through short-term missions. So I think there's a lot of power in that. And finally, what I'd say, the last slide, is this is your moment to integrate local and global mission. It's already been happening. You've been thinking about local and global in more of a connected way, but this is your moment to really connect them. And I would say the way you do that is you measure common things between local and global. So you're measuring the same for all of your impact. And that you look for intentional ways of connecting what you do in your local community, what you're doing globally, how that pandemic is bridging that divide, and you bring those two things together in powerful ways. So I hope these small ideas have been helpful instigators and brainstorming things, helping your innovation. And I just can't wait to see what God's going to do in your local missions programs as you strive to keep that missions flame fanned in your churches. So back to you, Matthew.
Wow.
Well, David, you're up. John, thank you. That was great stuff. Very practical, and I think a lot of churches could apply that.
I agree, Matthew. And John, thank you so much for sharing that. Honestly, I encourage you to pause this, or if you're watching this as a replay, you need to pause and take notes, because John, those were excellent practical tips and very powerful. I'm really appreciative of all the things that you shared. I want to kind of take a different direction, like I always do. You know, here I am in Thailand. It's 12:30 at night. I have a kind of different, unique perspective, coming from a place in the 1040 window with 95% Buddhist adherence, less than 1% Christian. And I want to kind of paint a picture of this pandemic, or this reality, this global crisis that we're going through, in a way that we see this more historical, long narrative that God has been painting. To do that, I'm going to use Hudson Taylor. And let me read you this. It says, "Not infrequently does our God bring his people into difficulties on purpose, that they may come to know him as they could not otherwise do." I believe that huge hurdles thrust you toward the harvest. That is the reality. This hurdle is thrusting us into a new harvest like never before. He went on to say, it needs the presence of special difficulties to manifest to all the workings of God's mighty power. And for such difficulties, we may and should be grateful and not cast down. Now, these words were spoken from experience. Hudson Taylor, 1854, he arrives in China. 2 months later, cannonballs catapult from red turban rebels, smashing the roof mere meters from his head. The war leaves him with no choice. He leaves his abandoned home. And this is what he said: "It was a step that was taken none too soon. For before the last of my belongings were removed, the house was burnt to the ground." Brief synopsis. Hudson Taylor's life. 1854, he presses deeper into China's interior. 1857, he loses all foreign support from Chinese Evangelization Society. These are things that are happening to missionaries right now. We are seeing drops in missionary giving as churches rethink how church happens. Much of the support comes from the West, particularly in America. And so we see this has been happening throughout history. 1858, he marries Maria and nearly loses her because of a near-death illness. These are the themes that go along throughout history. We're seeing them again today. 1861, illness sends Hudson Taylor home during the most fruitful season of his life, where he spends 6 years in England. 1865, he founds the China Inland Mission, and then 1867 travels with his wife and 4 children plus missionary recruits. They experience this power of the gospel spreading throughout China as they arrive, and yet new and deep sorrows await them. And I want to read you an excerpt from The Mind of a Missionary, a book that I wrote a couple of years ago. This is what it says. Mere months after arriving in China, Maria gave birth to another girl, Maria, only to lose her firstborn soon after. 9-year-old Grace died in a temple near Hangzhou on August 23, 1867. This became the story of their lives, gaining one child to lose another. Charles was born in 1868. Samuel, their fourth, died in 1870. Noel was born in July of the same year, but died 13 days later on July 20th. 10 days later after that, Maria Taylor died in Hudson's arms. As I read this, I do feel with emotion, because what we are experiencing now is very difficult and hard to understand, hard to fathom. Many of us have friends who have become sick. Many of us have friends who have passed away. We certainly do, both in the Philippines and in America. But I want to encourage you with this, brothers and sisters. In victory or distress, let us cling tightly to Jesus. He is in control of this present moment. And I believe he's going to reveal the reality that these huge hurdles thrust us into the harvest. 1876, as we look at Hudson Taylor's life, China Inland Mission grows from 50 to 52 missionaries. 1881, 76 more. 1887, 102. 1888, 294. And by 1939, almost 200,000 Chinese and minority people had been baptized. These present circumstances, as Hudson Taylor saw over 140 years ago, you're facing will result in an eternal harvest as you seek first the kingdom of God on your knees. And how does that happen? Moving man through God by prayer alone. As John shared a moment ago, prayer is not to be a little aspect, a slight side thing that we implement into our missions mandate. I do believe it should be integral in all that we do. You've heard it said before, prayer is the mighty engine that is to move the missionary work. A.B. Simpson said that. God forbid that we waste this time by not offering all our plans to God, who understands these times and the seasons. And again, let me read you, as we go to that next slide, moving man through God by prayer alone. This is what Hudson Taylor later said. Let us give up our work, our thoughts, our plans, ourselves, our lives, our loved ones, our influence, our all, right into his hand. And then when we have given all over to him, there will be nothing left for us to be troubled about or to make trouble about. It's time to spend time on our knees like never before, because we cannot manifest that heart or mind for missions that's devoid of relational intimacy. And here's the reality as I see it from my perspective here in the 1040 window. People are waiting at the other end of our obedience. And Matthew, you can go to the next slide there, as we've already moved into moving man through God by prayer alone. And as I live here in Thailand, it's home to 8 out of 10 of the poorest of the poor, not only Thailand, the 1040 window. Here in the 1040 window, 95% unreached. Gospel deprived people groups, over 2 billion people who've never heard the gospel at all. Daily, I meet people as we go out sharing, and in a moment, I'm going to share some specific things we've been doing during the COVID-19 crisis to rethink how we interact with people, and thus proclaim the gospel message deeper into society and community. I think we need to have the priorities of the global church shift towards the nation, for the nations to come to Christ, and that is only going to happen in prayer. Prayer leads to missions, and missions exists because Worship does not. We know that. John Piper says that. And you think back to this Moravian movement, where 100-year-long prayer movement that happened around the clock. It was led to a missions fervor that was unmatched at its time, and in many ways, even in this day. You know, this is what we've been doing. One of the keys we've been doing here at Within Reach Global. Our team gathers together for prayer. We always have a map in front of us. I would encourage you to do the same. Like John mentioned a while ago, think of the missionaries from your church. They are all over the nations. Pinpoint them on a map, pull them up on Google Maps, print it out, however you do it, and lay your hands on certain parts of the map, asking for God to break through or even speak to you how he's going to use you and the church as leadership to impact that nation. Obviously, JoshuaProject.net, we print out unreached peoples of the day, laying hands on them. We receive updates then from our indigenous missionaries in China. They come to us all in Chinese, where we spent 15 years, the last 15 years in China. And they come to us all in Chinese, and we see how they're reaching out, and we can pray specifically. I think that as you begin to implement focused prayer for unreached peoples, for the gospel deprived, for places that have never had the name of Jesus go before, not only will the nations be blessed, as John was sharing a moment ago, but your congregation is going to begin to sense this newfound wave of revival, this missions fervor that's never seen before, that's going to impact your city and your state, your zip code. And from that, revival is going to be birthed. When that happens, we see the call of the missionary mindset. And as we think about the call to a missionary mindset, it's recognizing that Jesus, the greatest missionary of all the world has ever seen, he left the most exclusive gated kingdom in all of the universe to live among the poor, the outcast, the misfits, the broken. So I think that we need to have the mind of Christ. The mind of Christ is that missionary mindset. Spurgeon famously said this: you're either a missionary or an imposter. I would say rather that those of us who have not yet recognized that that missionary mindset dwells inside the mind of Christ, we know little of God's overarching redemptive plan. COVID-19 changed everything that we as Christian leaders set our hands to. I do pray that we are reminded of the fact that Jesus said, go make disciples of all nations. His intention is that every member of the body of Christ is a minister, and each of us have a role to play in the Great Commission. So as you think about your congregation, the members in your church, the people that surround you, this is an opportunity. As the four walls are far away from us, we have gone online and in many ways connecting over the internet now. We're seeing that the run-of-the-mill ordinary folks are actually can have great impact. Some of them are having more impact than even many Christian leaders are happening right now. You know, when John urged you to view missionaries as a resource, not simply a recipient, he wasn't saying that missionaries have it all together or some kind of higher bracket than in God's kingdom. But I do think sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that we have everything to offer the overseas missionary. We are blessing them. They are the recipient. When really the cross-cultural missionary, like he said, is having to rethink all these things of how to impact society. So I'd like to share a couple of those things that we are seeing here in Thailand. Again, like I mentioned, 95% of this country is Buddhist. Less than 1% of them is Christian. So within Reach Global, we've been kind of walking through these great doors of opportunity by doing things we've never done. Our heart and passion at Within Reach Global is to share the gospel to unreached people groups in the 1040 window, and we do that by different means. Now these new opportunities have come, and here's a couple of them. We've been doing food distribution for Karen people at abandoned elephant camps. Never in my life would I have thought that we're going to be doing that. As I drive down the city streets here in Chiang Mai, Thailand, there are long lines of about 300-400 people waiting in the heat. It's over 100 degrees Fahrenheit here, and they're waiting in long lines just to receive food. People are starving, physically starving, because we rely heavily on tourism here in Thailand. So people are going hungry, and there is a huge need that we realize has just opened up because of that. Now, the suicide rate in Thailand is skyrocketing. You're going to have to contextualize this for your specific place and location, because you may not see that starvation per se, or you may not see a skyrocketing suicide rate. But the reality is, God may be giving you creative aspects and means to meet different needs that arise. Another one that we've been doing, basic necessities for impoverished Shan people at karaoke bars. We've been doing online prayer groups in restricted access countries that have grown to over 500 people on WeChat. What a horrible app to use for online broadcasting prayer events, but our local missionaries are doing that in China. We're praying with people around us right here in Thailand who are having dreams of Jesus. Jesus is appearing in their dreams. They contact us and they say, I have been a Buddhist all my life. Now I'm dreaming of Jesus. Why? What does this mean? They've heard that we're Christian, and open doors to share the gospel. Another thing we've been doing is partnering with Thai pastors and leaders to empower their evangelistic outreaches. Suddenly, we have many Thai partners and leaders. Perhaps God is calling us to look even cross-denominationally to different churches in your area to say, wow, how can we reach out to our community in ways that are going to make impact for the kingdom of God? Not perpetuating our logos and our labels. Who cares about the name within Reach Global? At the end of the day, this is all for Jesus. He will receive the glory. So as you survey the landscape of your city, searching for open doors, open hearts are there like never before. And I encourage you, think creatively, use your missionary as a resource, and make the most of every opportunity. Perhaps they'll be the one to jumpstart your creative process from a distance, because they have this objective perspective from outside America. I also want to point out that there's this portrait of God's overarching missions mandate. You know, John talked about reframing missions, short-term missions. Your church does not only exist for your city. Gospel blessing is meant to overflow to the nations, that Abrahamic covenant. This pandemic is causing us to rethink the how, but the why and the what of the Christian life remain the same. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. I'm not going to patronize you with the answer of who is your neighbor. It goes far and wide, from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. That missionary mindset is not saying that I want to be like our missionaries overseas because they have it all together. They're going to those, former cannibalistic societies or headhunters. No, actually what we're looking for is the mind of Christ. Some of these ways that missionaries might point out, and I would do for you, have your congregation or small group learn about God's overarching mandate through a couple ways. Just a couple hours ago, I watched with my daughter, we've been watching as a family, the Bible Project on YouTube. To me, they paint this overarching theme, a narrative throughout the whole Bible of God on mission. When I hear that, it really causes me to step out from beyond my little myopic sphere and see the biggerness of God's plan. I encourage you to check out the Bible Project on YouTube. It's a powerful tool. Also, find when Perspectives on the World Christian Movement is taking place. There's online classes, perhaps right now they won't be coming to your city, but online groups to see. This will really change the way your congregation views mission. Not missions as something far and away, distant out there, but we on mission, all of us together. So as we were talking earlier, before we even started broadcasting, recording this, many are seeing a lowering of missionary giving. They're seeing people who are, not wanting to go to the field. Here within Reach Global, we're seeing something different. We're seeing people apply for staff and career opportunities like never before. I've been surprised at this, but I do believe there is some sort of missionary zeal, some missions zeal that is about to take place in your congregation. Let's harness that passion with that portrait of God's overarching plan. And finally, I think this is what I would like to pinpoint the whole message behind. God's glory is the focal point of all our efforts. You know, I wrote The Mind of a Missionary a couple of years ago. I highlighted 3 underlying motivations in our missionary or missional efforts. Number 1, compassion for the lost. Number 2, obedience to the commands of Christ. Number 3, passion for the glory of God. So we often see the missions call, and I think this has happened historically, traditionally, many different churches. We give a empathetic missions call. It's given in an empathetic manner. The poor children, the unreached tribes, the trafficked sex workers, and we draw people to mission because of a compassion and empathetic draw. I think God is calling us during this time to look beyond that style of calling people into this picture. Compassion is biblical and it's healthy. Jesus does it in Matthew 9:38. He has compassion for the crowds like sheep without a shepherd, and challenges us to pray to the Lord of the harvest for more workers. But it should not be the paramount motivation that drives us to do local and global ministry. As John pointed out, this is in relation to missional integration, or mission integration between local and global. Secondly, we have obedience to the commands of Christ. It can easily turn into drudgery. I'm sure all of us are so tired of hearing of COVID-19. For those of you who are watching right now, I'm surprised you're here. This is another thing dealing with COVID-19. This is not what this webinar is about. It's actually about the biggerness, again, of God's overarching missions mandate. If we look at simply the obedience to the commands of Christ, it can easily become drudgery. I've seen that in my missionary career. I believe that a passion for the glory of God should be the starting point of all our evangelistic efforts. If not, for the glory of God as an underlying motivation, Zhang Rong would have never, he would have given up his calling many years ago. Zhang Rong is one of our first indigenous missionaries from China who joined with Inreach Global over 15 years ago. You know, he was, and as we think in the COVID-19 perspective, we are getting to a glimpse of something that is one of many trials in the lives of Christians whose faith is being challenged all over the world. Zhang Rong was jailed for sharing the gospel on the China-Myanmar border. He would have given up his calling when he held the ash remains of Yu Xiang, a 12-year-old girl who died as we sought to reach out to her. She was a little girl in our outreach center in Myanmar. He would have given up as he was drunk punched on among the Yao people on the Vietnam-China border. He was beaten and had cigarette butt burns on his face, and then returned to my home. 3 days later, I saw these cigarette butt burns all over his face, and I said, do you need to take a break from ministry? We need to send you home. I had this fatherly kind of care for him, and he prayed the most beautiful Acts 29 prayer, thanking Jesus that he was counted worthy to suffer for his name's sake. And because of his commitment to the glory of God, through his many sufferings and persecutions, 300 people came to the Lord, opened up a brand new outreach center in Myanmar. The guy who drunk punched him on the Vietnam-China border bowed before him one day, weeping, asking his forgiveness, joining him then as his missionary companion who continues to travel among the Yao people today. This young man, Zhang Rong, is a man who has learned how to integrate local and global or cross-cultural ministry. He's a 4th generation young man from an Aka or Hani village. And yet the story does not begin there. There in his village lie the remains of 4 Danish missionaries who at the turn of the 20th century gave their lives for his tribe. All this to say, this narrative I hope to bring to you. I know it's gone back in history, and I know that I'm using many examples that are specific to me here in Southeast Asia. But for you, they would have never seen the attended result. We would have never seen the fruition of all his missional efforts unless we had God's glory at the epicenter of all that we're doing. I do think that he's causing us to be in this time to allow us to reshift how we're doing things. to see that we are part of a longer narrative, missionaries throughout history, people, brothers and sisters throughout the nations who are undergoing tremendous difficulty. We now get to share in their sufferings, as a moment ago John shared as well. I pray that as we think on these things, as we have a bigger, more global mindset, we would see God at work in our lives now. And I do pray that God would continue to use all your efforts. Let me recap our John's and my 5 keys to keeping the missions flame during a pandemic. View suffering as part of the journey, realizing that huge hurdles thrust you toward the harvest. Number 2, see prayer as tactical work, understanding that you can move man through God by prayer alone. See missionaries as resources, not simply a recipient, and grow in your missionary mindset. Number 4, reframe the idea of short-term missions, recognizing this grand portrait of God's overarching missions mandate. And lastly, integrate local and global missions with God's glory as the focal point of all your efforts. May you be blessed and encouraged during this season. And I'm just honored to be able to share these things with you. So Matthew, I think it's your time to take over. I appreciate this opportunity to share, and pray that all of you are feeling God's presence right now, even as we have this time seeing his bigness.
Hey, David, thank you so much. Both you and John, again, shared some really great stuff that I trust is a blessing to those who are listening. It certainly is a blessing to me, and I'm walking away with some great ideas myself. I apologize, folks. We had an audio outage there. I'm tethered to my hotspot and using my home router as well, but for whatever reason, we had a drop out there for a moment. So we lost video, and I would turn the video on now, but let's preserve bandwidth. So this is your opportunity, let me remind you, to enter into conversation with both David and John. And so on the right-hand side of your screen is a task panel. And if you'll just type in your questions into that panel, I will shoot them off to David and John for our remaining time together today. Let's see here. One concern, during this lockdown, our cross-cultural workers already have so much more going on as they seek to creatively minister to the people to whom they've been sent. How can we be aware how can we be careful not to overload them by putting additional things on their plates in an attempt to help our local churches learn to pray? So either of you.
Yeah, I'll start out, then I'll pitch it over to you, David. I think that I would say 2 things to that. I would say, number 1, thank you for being concerned for them in that way, because it's absolutely true. The daily life and efforts is even harder in other countries, even more so than here. But what I would say to you as well is that in lockdown, their activities are different. They have different kinds of flexibilities. They have different kinds of abilities to participate than they did 3 months ago. And so I don't assume that they don't have the time. But ask them, I think, with that sensitivity, that empathy that you described. And secondly, I would say it's really, really important to recognize that they most of the time desire more connection with your church than a lot of times local churches can give for lots of reasons. So assume that there is actually pent up desire to make that happen rather than an imposition on your part.
I absolutely agree with that, John. And I think if they are sent from your church, they're going to be excited to receive an opportunity like this, because like John said, they want to be involved. They want to not only be a name on the back of the foyer, they want to be contacted. For me, we're having many churches reach out to us, and I feel honored. I feel blessed. I feel like we're not out of sight, out of mind. I also would not assume that they are overloaded. Look at me, I'm on at 1 a.m. here in Thailand time doing a webinar. They'll stay up at different hours of the day and night. They'll want to connect with you. So I think it's great that you reach out to them.
Yeah, I heard a missionary talk about reciprocity during this time, that they're often on the receiving end of support, and this is an opportunity for them to give support to
Yeah.
those who've invested in them. And what this person said is, we've been practicing social distancing for a long time in a sense. Yeah, of course, the idea is to interact with those you're reaching, but they're distanced from family members and friends. So they're acquainted with social distancing and then just living in an unfamiliar environment. They've been living that for years. So I think it would be incredibly encouraging for some of those missionaries, if you reach out to them and say, could you teach us? You've been through this. What lessons do you have for us? So excellent. This is a great question. And again, both of you can address this. How would you encourage missionary deputies who are seeking to raise prayer and monetary support during this time? So, not missionaries on field, but missionaries who are in the shoot, as it were. How do you help them?
Well, I think during this time we need to be more bold than we have been in the past. I think we sometimes have this tendency to operate differently in the Christian realm as we see in the secular. And every advertisement is shouting into our faces all the time. I would encourage people to be more bold than they ever have for the sake of the people they seek to reach, and go use the God Ask by Steve Shadrach as a way of relationally connecting with people. Steve Shadrach, supportraisengsolutions.com, I think it is, also wrote the book, The God Ask. Powerful way of connecting face to face with people. You may or may not be able to do that. Do it on a Zoom conversation. But I think right now is the time to be bold and say, look, we're all in this together. I'm going regardless of the difficulty. Can you be a part of my journey? Can you be the one who holds the rope to lower me down in the gold mines of souls? Encourage them to be more bold than they ever have, because people respond to that kind of mission zeal in a very positive way.
All I would add to that, it's great challenge to be more bold. I think one of the things, at SIL, we're raising funds for a COVID-19 fund, and a lot of the questions are, is this a good time to be asking people, many of them who are out of work and that sort of thing. And as I've meditated on that, prayed, and as I've talked to donors who've been reaching out to, I've realized something. One is you can actually reach them now. So young missionaries who might have had trouble getting 20 minutes with someone because they're busy, they're going to soccer practice to pick up kids, they got all these meetings. You can actually get a time with them much easier today than you could have even 5 months ago. So I think
You're right.
access is actually better now. On the issue of funding, this is where you just have to be extremely empathetic and say, listen, we're all suffering together. And you may not have money right now. You may be worried about your job. Well, let's pray about that. And what are the ways you can support me as I'm looking to go to the mission field? Do you want to be part of my long-term team, knowing that you can't give this first year, but maybe you can give a year from now, right? Finding creative ways to say, what I really want is have you on my team.
Yeah.
God will provide the money. He'll make that work over the time. But right now, what I want is to get you on my team, because I need people around me who are going to encourage me to the mission field. And I think getting people on your team today is actually easier than it was a few months ago.
I concur with that, and I'll just add a little bit to that. We have never called our donors here at Within Reach Global. They're not even called supporters. We call them vision partners. That shared vision right now, like John was saying, I think is very much accessible, and people are very excited to jump on with a vision that is looking beyond our present situation and our present selves.
Yeah, I also think that there are certain people right now who have a gift of giving, and they're going to be more generous during this season, not less. It's not true across the board, okay? But there are people out there. The crisis has just, reinforced the brevity of life and
Yeah.
the fragility of money and material things. And so I think that's right. Cast a gospel vision and invite people into partnership, and watch God move. So, brothers, we're wrapping it up. We're hit almost at the hour now today. And again, for those of you who remained online, really appreciate it. Sorry about the technical glitches, certainly outside my hand, but too many kids are playing Fortnite, too many people watching Netflix, I imagine, and all the bandwidth is getting eaten up. But brothers, as always, really helpful. I'm getting some comments here coming in at the end. Thank you so much. Encouraging, helpful information. People saying, can I get the points again? So I want to remind everyone that this webinar has been recorded, will be available for your viewing within a week, and you can get those points. I will also be sending these questions to the both of you, and you may want to send directly to those individuals who asked for the points. Let me do this right now. I want to make sure that the folks still online are able to get in touch with both of you if they want to. So there is David's information and some links on how to follow him and learn more about Within Reach Global.
It's all the same link there, right? Just my name.
There you go. That's an easy one. And then John as well. And I will leave that up for a moment there. Again, just a reminder, I've said it a few times, but this has been recorded, folks, and it will be available here within a week. And please visit our website. Take advantage of our archived webinars. I want to reinforce God, Germs, and Global Missions Part 1 was excellent. It was so well received that we did today. So if you have not watched that one, please do so. And then there's a whole bevy of webinars and various resources that would be beneficial to you, not only during crisis, but just on regular basis. They're there for you. So, brothers, thank you again for your time, your wisdom, your experience. And thank you to the audience for being a part of the day. I see that that Thai bow there, brother. That thank you very much.
I'm going to be doing that when I go back to America. I'm not shaking hands anymore.
Hey, that's right, man. Okay, folks, thanks so much. This is Matthew Ellison for 1615 signing off. God bless you.